This is the place, the making of modern Mormon myth. Four leading members of Brigham Young's 1847 company in particular provide us with the most insightful journal accounts along their trek west. Three apostles, Heber C. Kimball, Orson Pratt, and Wilford Woodruff, along with historian and scribe William Clayton, pen some of the most extensive description of the events that transpired between winter quarters and the Salt Lake Valley. Some rather curious information is included among their entries. William Clayton is well known for the odometer that he built and used along the trail. He recorded daily mileage traveled by the company down to each quarter mile. One detail not as well known is his and others' daily record of geographical coordinates. On June 26, as a group crossed the Continental Divide, Clayton records, "The latitude at our noon halt was 42 degrees, 22 minutes, and 42 seconds." Perhaps most curious of all are the measurements taken by Orson Pratt. Not only did he frequently record trail width in certain places and the height of nearby rock formation, but at least once each day and occasionally multiple times daily, he took barometric pressure readings, which he then used to derive altitude. According to Pratt, on June 27, at 9:30, the barometer stood at 23.303, attached thermometer 68.6 degrees. Heber C. Kimball added, "Elder Pratt took a barometrical observation and found the altitude to be 7,085 feet above the level of the sea." This kind of meticulous data entry is certainly impressive for the sake of documentation purposes, but one has to wonder that if future pioneer companies would be following the trail Brigham Young and his associates blazed, couldn't they just observe the ruts left by wagon wheels and the boards and marked trees, which Young had mentioned in his earlier letter? Such precise coordinates, barometric readings, and elevation calculations wouldn't likely be that necessary to pioneer groups. Those numbers, however, would be of utmost significance to engineers designing a railroad route, where trail width and mountain gradient must be given careful consideration. The mileage and latitude calculations would also give engineers a course to plot on maps, thus helping plan for all construction materials that would be needed. Were those measurements Brigham Young's calculations for a railroad across this country he would mention more than 2 decades later? On successive days which followed crossing the Continental Divide, the Mormons encountered a pair of seasoned explorers. First, Moses Harris of the Oregon Territory, and later, Jim Bridger. During those days, the two wilderness veterans each camped with Young's company. Both men offered advice to the Mormons, who made many inquiries of them in relation to the Great Basin and the country south. The information from Bridger was rather more favorable than that of Major Harris. Clayton corroborates the account that their company went to Mr. Bridger to make some inquiries concerning the future route and country, etc. Moses Harris apparently spoke very highly of Cache Valley, the region surrounding the Bear River, and another valley about 40 miles above the mouth of that river. Bridger, on the other hand, seemed to be more impressed with the Salt Lake Valley and lands further south. Among the territory he mentioned specifically was Utah Lake and the country southeast, probably Sanpete Valley, Sevier Lake, a splendid range of country on the north side of the California mountains, which location remains uncertain, and another valley about 20 days' travel on horse southeast of the Salt Lake, which he claimed would grow virtually anything and called a promised land if there ever was one. Wilford Woodruff states that Bridger spoke more highly of the Great Salt Lake for a settlement than Major Harris did, that it was his, and if the people settled in it, he wanted to settle with them. His only reservation of living there permanently was the Great Basin region's regular winter frost. On June 29, Woodruff writes, "We parted this morning with Mr. Bridger, who remarked that it would not be prudent to bring a great population into the basin, until we ascertained whether grain would grow or not. Bridger did cite the several native tribes among other settlers in the region who regularly grew corn and other crops. In regards to these accounts of the Mormons' interviews with both Harris and Bridger, one must wonder why they saw the need to make such initial inquiries and then describe in such detail all of the territory which the explorers described. If Brigham Young had already seen a vision of their future home, why then would they need to seek out all this additional information? Did Jim Bridger know something that God didn't? If the Salt Lake Valley was already the planned destination of this pioneer company, why bother giving such attention to Bridger's descriptions of regions that were hundreds of miles away from it? At no point in the record is it ever mentioned that Young heard accounts of the Salt Lake or surrounding valleys and then corroborated them with a vision or prophecy of the place where the Latter-day Saints were destined to settle. Jim Bridger's comment about growing crops in the Great Basin places new light on the activities of the advance party who entered the Salt Lake Valley on June 22nd. When they immediately began planting potatoes and a variety of other crops. The Mormons may not have yet decided that spot would be their permanent home. It's likely they were simply following his advice to learn if they could actually grow their own food in this location. When Brigham Young finally arrived in the Salt Lake Valley on July 24 as passenger in Wilford Woodruff's carriage, the scene before them was certainly promising. As the day closed, Woodruff wrote, "This is an important day in the history of my life and the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." He follows this declaration with numerous lines of text describing in detail the impressive view and vegetation that surrounded them. But this entry's only mention of Young or anything he might have said that day is limited to a single sentence. President Young expressed his full satisfaction in the appearance of the valley as a resting place for the saints and was amply repaid for his journey. Woodruff's comment about President Young provides some helpful insight into the mind of the Mormon leader at that time. By noting Young's acknowledgement of the valley as a satisfactory resting place for the saints, he implies that this moment was the first time Brigham felt confident in making that decision. When Woodruff added the detail about Young being repaid for his journey, it further drives home the idea that up until this point, Brigham likely wasn't sure. He was repaid by gaining the needed information he had been seeking, and that made his journey worth it. But one thing Woodruff fails to mention here are the exact words Young uses in their discussion. Had Brigham Young told him, "This is the right place," the comment certainly did not register enough significance to Woodruff at that time to make note of it. Heber C. Kimball also emerged from Emigration Canyon in the trailing caravan alongside both Young and Woodruff on July 24th. But his entry that day is just a single mundane paragraph describing the road's condition and the total distance traveled. He neither makes mention of the group pausing to visually survey the valley before them, nor any statements made by Young that day. Later that evening, according to William Clayton, Elder Kimball says that it is contemplated to send out an exploring party to start on Monday and proceed north to the Bear River and Cache Valleys. They design taking several wagons with them, and President Young and Kimball accompanies the expedition. Another company is to start at the same time and go west to the lake, and then south to Utah Lake and return down this valley. Even at this late date, it appears the Mormons were not completely certain the Salt Lake Valley would be their home, and were still making contingency plans. Through all the meticulous journal entries, detailed description of their travels, and memories of the conversation with the local explorers, one might think it worthwhile to record, at some point, a prophetic declaration of their company's esteemed leader. But at this point it appears as yet unknown that this is the place. 3 years following these events, Apostle Orson Pratt wrote a series of articles published in the Latter-day Saint Millennial Star, recounting the entire journey from winter quarters to Salt Lake Valley. These articles, appearing from January through June 1850, came directly from his own personal journals. Pratt provides thorough detail about not only the events and scenery encountered along the trail, but also many of the measurements described previously. What is odd, though, about his retelling of the trek is not what he says about the journey, but what is conspicuously absent from the story. Pratt concludes his series by describing how he began exploring the valley and looking for places where he might plant crops on July 22nd. There is not a single mention of the 24th, nor anything memorable that may have occurred that day. It appears that, even as late as 1850, at least some members of the faith did not place any significance on the date July 24th, 1847.